Welcome to my show simply entitled Women Influencers. I am Veronica CCIM, founder and CEO of Capstack Commercial, a commercial real estate company serving the greater Orlando area. Today's guest is Andi Simon, a corporate anthropologist with an impressive background from Penn State, Columbia, and Monmouth University, New Jersey. Her focus is on how people modify and adapt to change. Her impact on the changes in the banking and healthcare industries is so very interesting, so you will absolutely enjoy Andi's episode. Please don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe below. I welcome your comments and please share with someone who can benefit from this podcast. Well, hello, Andi. How are you today?
I'm wonderful, Veronica. Thank you for having me on your wonderful podcast.
Oh, I am just so delighted to have you because you have such a story to tell. So thank you again for being here for our listeners. I wanted to get started, if you don't mind, and ask you about your story, how you grew up in your environment and how you got to where you are today.
Well, you know, as an anthropologist, stories are the essence of who we are. So it's a great opening for our conversation. I am a corporate anthropologist. And sometimes we think about our story backwards. I'd like to start where I started. And that is, I was a part of a family firm in New York City. And I was being trained to take over this retail business. My grandmother was a professional. My mother was. My father and she ran the business, and I was being trained to do it. And then I went off to college. I went to Penn State, and I discovered anthropology by chance. And I will talk about chance a lot because I do think it's the way we live our lives. But I fell in love with the whole approach to stepping out and seeing how people see, feel, and think and do. And most people don't know what they do until somebody steps out and helps them see it. So I finished my undergraduate work at Columbia University, and then I went right into a doctoral program. I went to Greece to study Greek immigrants and return migration. And what I became very interested in was how people change. Immigrants, yourself is an immigrant. You begin to understand that the old culture doesn't work in the new place, but you don't want to give it up either. So you modify it and adapt it. And most of my doctoral work was on how people do just that. And I was at university, Ramapo University in New Jersey, an interdisciplinary college. And I was teaching folks who were coming out of the Vietnam War. It was the most interesting disconnect. But I learned a lot about how to adapt to what the audience, your customers wanted and needed. I got my tenure, got my postdoc, did a couple of TV series, and I was perfectly happy being a professor until my husband was at a Citibank event, and he was an executive at Citibank during the Great Transformation, deregulation. And what Andi did was introduce me to a whole lot of folks who said, why don't you come and help us change?
Hold on. Mm-hmm. So your husband's name is also Andi.
I'm sorry. Yes, he's also Andi. Yeah, we've been married for 56 years. So he and I are the Andis. It is wonderful.
That's so great. Please continue.
Well, even at Citibank, I sometimes got invited to meetings I wasn't intended to go to, but it was always fun. And as long as you have fun, it's great. Anyway, I became a consultant for Citibank, and somebody said you should take your MBA on the job. And I spent several years there. And I turned around some branches and I helped them introduce direct access. And I learned a lot about how challenging change is for people. And then I got recruited to Poughkeepsie Savings Bank, the bank of FDR. So you can imagine going from New York City with all the new to a country bank that still had, $100 million in passports. And passbooks were going away, but people didn't want to give them up. And I spent my time there really learning about how you can help people see things through a fresh lens, begin to embrace the new, and you can't do it through directing them. You have to do it by engaging them. And if they can't see the value in something, they will never, ever do it. So I spent several years there, and then I got recruited by a friend of mine who is president of First National Bank of Highland. Now, here you have an anthropologist in banking during change. The only thing I knew was that people needed to know how to change. And my friend was running a bank, and he had acquired a division or a branch of a chemical bank too fast and blown up his back office. And we had a whole lot of work to fix things. And the examiners arrived the day after I did. And I had an interesting career there, helping them stabilize and change. Now, that sort of gave me a setup because an ex-Citi banker called me one day and said, don't you want to come work in healthcare? They're going through managed care. So here as an anthropologist is wandering through banking to help them change. And now I move into healthcare during managed care when the doctors would scream at you, I can take care of a patient, but I don't know how to find one. A whole different business model was emerging. And so I really did, I did 4 or 5 years at healthcare, two different hospitals. One was a Jewish hospital, one was a Catholic hospital, very different ways of delivering care. It was very interesting. As an anthropologist, I was both observing as well as facilitating. And this is where you hone your skills. And as your listeners are thinking about it, it wasn't what I did, it's what people needed. And you became really attuned not to be driving it from this is the way it ought to be to this is how we remember your brain needs conversational intelligence. It needs to hear the we for it to begin to listen. And then after 9/11, I launched my business. So I'm in business 22 years now. And I launched it. My PR firm said, Andi, you're a corporate anthropologist that helps companies change. And I went, bingo, that's who I am. That's what I've done. What I didn't realize was that they really didn't want an anthropologist. They wanted to change. And so I picked up clients right away, but the pitch wasn't about what I did or how I would help them. It was a gap between where they were, where they knew they had to go. And while we're going through fast changing times now, 22 years ago was fast changing times. I mean, people are always going through great transformations. And so as I grew my business, I learned a lot about different industries. And a lot of my work was in healthcare and transformation. A lot of it was in manufacturing. People didn't know why their products weren't selling. And I've had a wonderful, 22 years of helping companies do what they hate to do, change. And the
Yeah.
people inside, I used to say, if you want to change, have a crisis or create one. Never did I expect a pandemic. Never would I want another one. But I must tell you, it has brought to life all the changes that maybe were lying under the surface before the pandemic and have now blossomed, bloomed, and created the wonderful chaos that I happen to enjoy, which is how do you help people rebuild a new normal, which is never normal. And I've written 3 books. The first one is called On the Brink On the Brink of Fresh Lens to Take Your Business to New Heights. It's how anthropology can help your business grow. And it sold extremely well. Brought me great clients in Mexico and India and Canada, US. And my second book called Rethink, Smashing the Myths of Women in Business, is about 11 women who simply said, of course we can. One was a geologist and said, women aren't geologists. And she said, of course we can. One's in aerospace. We can say, no, we don't. One woman wanted to be an attorney and her parents had her have lunch with a friend. And he said, oh, don't ever be an attorney. Lady lawyers never have a good life. And she's a very successful attorney. And so every one of them, one's a college president, they all overcame the limitations. And you and I both know that unless you can believe in what you can become, you can't become it. And if you listen to the no, you don't, you won't. And your mind is a very
Exactly.
powerful creature, right?
Oh, absolutely. Wow, your story is amazing, Andi. I mean, you are an academic and you were a corporate professional and an author, and just all the things that you've just shared with us today has been just truly mind-boggling for me. And I love that you have an anthropology background because really I've never had anyone who's had that background and who's been applied to the business industry. So I truly, truly am awed by everything that you've just shared with us. So let me ask you a question, Andi. Was there one challenge that comes to mind that you actually was able to overcome? I mean, we've talked about all the challenges of women, for instance, the fact that people will say, no, you can't do it, or all that noise that happens in the background, not just to women, but to everybody. What would that challenge be, and how did you overcome that?
Well, I had my children and they were 14 months apart, and I was a professor. And I worked with my husband to work out a schedule so that I taught Wednesdays and Saturdays, and he could take care of them on Saturdays. And we found people who are nannies to take care of them on Wednesday. But quite frankly, I never anticipated the challenge of raising 2 beautiful women. They were gorgeous children. And the one thing that I learned early is that, as with other things, it's about them. And so as long as you can focus on their interests, their needs, not me, but I will tell you that over the years, I have found, and they've grown into beautiful young women. They're happily married. We have great grandkids. They're happy. So something percolated down. But I also think that I have had a hard time with my own identity. I find myself when I introduce myself, I'm perfectly fine doing the professional part, but not the personal part. And so as I thought about the challenge is that we are whole people. And being a mother, being a wife, being a woman, being a professional are all who we are, not one of them. And so every time I say I'm a corporate anthropologist, it helps companies change. I like to add, but I did a pretty good job with two young women who had to grow up also. And I wasn't quite sure what I was doing, but we worked it out.
That's awesome. And let me tell you, I have had so many women on my show that have talked about that particular challenge of being a woman raising children and having responsibilities that are really unique to a woman. For instance, breastfeeding. I mean, sure, we
I
can
know.
always say that we can share responsibilities, but it's really not the same, is it? Well, I'm glad to hear that you, through your, I think from my sense, you have self introspection all the time, self-awareness. And because of your anthropology background, I hear you say a lot about the we rather
Mhm.
than the
Yeah.
I. And that's when you actually learn to listen. I
But
love that.
one thing to add, Veronica, if you'll let me, I took my daughters when they were 4 and 5 to Greece to do research.
Mm,
Now, this was pre-iPhone, no internet. I have all the letters I sent to my husband. I think I was fortunate to have such a generous and kind husband who supported us. I'm not sure my daughters knew what we were doing, but we headed over there and then we took a boat to a small island. The island had one car on it and we rode donkeys and they were great explorers with their mother. They don't talk about it often, and I'm not sure I want to ask them much about what they remember. But here I am trying to balance the professional side and the personal side. And I think you need a lot of teamwork to make it all happen and still smile at the end of it.
absolutely. I totally agree. I wanted to move on and ask you about influence. And our show is entitled Women Influencers. And to me, it's all about an outcome that someone actually has impacted. So if there was one thing that comes to mind that you're most proud of, that you had influenced, what would that be?
I thought about that question a lot because I never thought of myself as an influencer. But I look back over particularly my banking career, and I thought that that was one of the most difficult times because the world was changing. Deregulation was creating all kinds of new things. And particularly for Poughkeepsie Savings Bank, the old bank of FDR, I needed to influence the folks working there to begin to see themselves in a new way. We did a lot of role playing. We did a lot of acting. Some of the folks who were there have moved into senior positions, and one's the president of a bank. And they come back occasionally on Facebook and say, "Boy, what you left with me, I have no idea what I did for them." But I had to influence the changes. Putting ATMs in, as you can well imagine, was threatening to
Mhm.
tellers. Of course, it didn't really challenge them, but in their minds, it was. We had bought a bank down in the Carolinas, and I had to go down there to see how we were going to integrate it. It was a little early in the growth stage, but it was a good idea. But all along the way, that particular experience, I was pretty autonomous, had a lot of power and influence, and I had to really work hard to change the mind so that I wasn't the problem. It was an environment going through transformation, and I was an enabler, a facilitator, an influencer, kind woman who was going to help them get there. And it was mobilizing them with positivity as opposed to negativity. And that sticks in my mind as I couldn't direct, I had to help. And it was an interesting learning experience.
Oh, it's truly amazing how change is just so frightening
Yes.
to a lot of people. to the workforce. I mean, let's talk about AI and how people are so worried about that. I mean, in the 60s, I think, was the typewriter, and then the computers came. I mean, it's pretty incredible. I wanted to ask you if there was one piece of advice that you could give to our audience, what would that be?
No, I think that the most important thing you should do is believe in yourself. Nobody else can. And if you can become whatever it is you think you want to be. It may be detours along the way, and it is a journey. But if you believe in yourself, that journey will take you to some marvelous places along a destination route. And I do think the metaphor of a journey is a very powerful one. So believe in yourself, take a journey, and enjoy the trip.
I love that. You know, I'm going to tell you that I am about to embark on a different sort of segment of my industry. And I am actually entering the development space. And I had someone actually ask me the question of why I would do that, since I am in a safe place right now.
Mm.
And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I'm older, sure. I'm not young, but do you think that age has something to do with just a point in your life where you have to say you're safe, you shouldn't do anything else?
Well, you're talking to the wrong woman.
Yeah.
The other part is that I truly believe that if you see something and it feels right, we decide with the eyes and the heart, go for it. What's the worst that can happen? You say, well, that was a good idea, but it didn't work.
Yeah.
All had those
Truly.
detours along the way. The other part is that I believe in serendipity. You know, chance is not a bad stuff. Are you lucky or smart? It depends if you take the chance or you don't. And slowly, if you don't, you'll find yourself shrinking back further and further. I think that the world you're in is moving. You want to lead, follow, or get out of the way. And I do think that's who you are.
Oh, that's so inspirational. I really, really just cherish what you just said. Because in my mind, I thought when I was asked that question, my mind was saying, well, because I can, right? Because
Yes.
the question was, well, why would you?
Why not?
And the answer is because I can. And you're right. You know, maybe it was a great idea and maybe, you know, it doesn't pan out, but hey, why not, right? It's not, I mean, I don't think that when you're already in your 60s, like I am, that the world ends or your career ends. I think you got to just keep on doing it. I really, really am so excited to have you, Andy. We've come to the part of the show where you get to ask me a question. So please go ahead.
Well, as a podcast host myself, I'm always interested in why other people have created the podcast. So my question for you is, the point of your podcast, how are you making it valuable to yourself and to others? And give me some wisdom in your wisdoms.
I love talking to people,
Mm.
people that I would never have connected with, just like you, Andy. I would have never thought that I would connect with someone like you, an anthropologist who's in the corporate world. I love that. And I think that for myself personally, I have grown since interviewing so many women on my podcast because this is a storytelling podcast.
Yes.
And when I hear stories about you and the other women that I've interviewed, I think to myself, how beautiful is this world?
Yes.
That we all have a story to tell. And in the course of an interview and sharing our stories to the world, we get to probably touch someone we don't even know.
Yep.
And that is really what inspires me to keep going. I mean, podcasting is not easy. You know that because you've done it for so long. How many episodes have you done on your?
I just finished my 404th yesterday.
Wow, amazing, amazing. So this is really very enjoyable for me, and I hope it's enjoyable for our audience
Yes.
because I always take away a golden nugget every time I hear somebody's story. So thank you for that question. I wanted to ask you before we go, how do people find you? And tell us a little bit about your books and where to actually buy them if somebody was interested out there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Clearly, LinkedIn is a favorite location. It's either Andi Simon or Andrea Simon there. The websites, I have two, but one is simonassociates.net. That's really all about the anthropology. And then andysimon.com has all my books on it. And then Amazon loves you if you love books. So that On the Brink is there, and Rethink Smashing the Myths of Women is there, and Women Mean Business is there. And I actually did the audio for On the Brink myself, so it sells remarkably well. But I do think that for your listeners, I'd love to hear from them, and I'd love to talk about how seeing, feeling, and thinking differently can help you see your opportunities personally and professionally. It's a really cool time to rethink and get off the brink.
Oh, I love that. As a matter of fact, I'm just so excited. I think I'm going to go on Amazon and buy your book. So thank you so much, Andy, for being with us today. I really, really love your story and everything that you've shared. Do you have some parting words before we go?
I often preach, take your observations and turn them into innovations, even as you're thinking about change yourself, because your mind loves ideas and you don't really keep them, you kill them. So my parting words is, if you see it, believe it, and then try it and let your eyes help guide you. Life is an interesting journey and it's ready to help you get someplace fascinating and have fun.
Thank you. That was so wonderful. And with that, I will say farewell. And I know that I will see you again soon. And take care, Andy.
Thank you, Veronica.